please join us in a very warm virtual welcome for Michelle Icard. Take it away, Michelle.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here, and thanks to everyone who is joining us. I am just going to quickly share my screen so that we can begin with the slideshow. So 8 setbacks that can make a child a success. We are going to talk about setbacks today. We're going to talk about failure. We're going to talk about whatever word you like to use, missteps, mistakes, face plants, that we know every child, every preteen, and every teen is going to experience, and how we as the loving adults in their lives can help them work through those experiences so they don't get stuck in the mud, and so that they really can use that as a launch pad to learn more about themselves and about the world around them and to grow. So we're going to talk about failure, but before we do, I want to touch on a little concept that these cupcakes remind me of. And the concept in the book is called impression management. It's not my term. It comes from a psychologist named Erving Goffman. And this term, impression management, is really about how we manage what other people think of us, what impressions we hope to create by performing for them. And often we perform differently for different audiences. Your teen performs differently for their friends than they do for you, than they may for their grandparents or for your neighbors. And we all do this. The cupcakes are a reminder for me because I think about someone who might post on social media, oh, what a fail. What a hashtag fail. I ruined all of these cupcakes. And often doing that is really a distraction. It's a way of saying, look at this crazy mistake I made, this terrible thing that I did, but don't look over here at what's really happening behind the scenes, at the really kind of big, scary stuff that my family's going through or that my child is going through. Just look at the messy cupcake. Ha, 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 right? So a lot of times our impression management is our attempt to hide what's really going on. We're going to be talking about the importance of a little bit of transparency around failure, around screwing up. And I want to talk about why impression management matters so much to tweens and teens in particular. It probably doesn't surprise you to know that tweens and teens think about their impressions that they're making on other people nearly constantly. We as adults, we have fully developed identities and senses of ourselves. And so we don't rely on other people's reactions to us to tell us who we are. Young people often do. So impression management isn't just the act of performing for other people. So like, I'm a writer and I perform for you all by writing a book and hoping that you like it and hoping that you read it and think that it has value. I'm a partner and I perform that role by being a good wife to my husband, or I'm a parent by being a good parent to my children, and so on. For teens and tweens, this act of impression management is not just performing a role, it is really how they figure out who they are. So it's not just going on stage and being somebody else, doing a performance, and then retiring and being, their normal selves back at home. It's performing for a group and getting feedback. And that feedback says to them, you are a funny person, you are a caring person, you are a likable person, all of these things. Sometimes the feedback that we get is affirming. Sometimes it tells us something good about ourselves. I go and pick up my husband's prescription at the store and he sends me a text saying, honey, that was so nice of you, thank you. And I think, impression management. I've made a good impression on my partner. I am a good partner. Sometimes the feedback that we get is not affirming, but it's constructive. So maybe I'm at a party and I tell a joke and I can see that it's rubbed someone the wrong way. Well, I've learned from that, hopefully, right? So sometimes we get constructive feedback, and sometimes the feedback that we get is destructive. So we might try something on for size and we get feedback that what we did wasn't good. Or possibly we take that feedback and we internalize it and we think I'm not good. Maybe I'm not likable because of that mistake I made. I want to frame our conversation by beginning with this idea of impression management, because I think it's our role as the adults in our children's lives, and as we talk for the next 30, 40 minutes about the many ways that kids will fail or mess up or have a setback, I think it's our role to talk about these experiences in ways that become constructive and in ways that can be affirming, and that we're really careful about not verging into territory that says to our kids, this mistake is going to be a part of you forever. So that's why I set it up with this. And we're going to segue into talking about how kids learn. So let's talk about sort of 3 boxes in the way that kids experience the stuff that they go through in life. So sometimes things are really easy. Sometimes a kid is a natural at something and it just comes to them. And that is the easy box, and it's great. It's kind of exciting when you're a parent and that happens. But it's not a way in which kids learn. They just kind of are. They're good at that, right? They're a natural athlete. And then sometimes things are painful. And what I mean by painful is actually more of a discomfort. It feels like it's not easy. It might hurt a little bit physically. It might hurt a little bit emotionally. It's putting me in a place that where I'm a little agitated, right? And that is how kids grow. When they experience discomfort and when they experience some pain, that's how they build strength. And the 3rd box here is trauma. If things are traumatic, then of course we don't see growth and we don't see self-acceptance, and we get into a really dangerous territory. So I want you to think about this almost in terms of exercise. If you're someone who works out and you work out with 1 pound weights consistently, technically you're exercising, but you're not breaking down and repairing muscle in a way that's going to make you stronger, right? On the other hand, if you use weights that are way too heavy for you on a consistent basis, you're probably going to get injured and you're probably going to give up. You may get injured to the point that you can't continue to work out. What you really want to do is be in that point where you are tearing and repairing your muscle. And this is how you grow as a human being and how your muscles grow. And this is how your kids grow. So I see some parents who are really working to make things easy for their kids. They are doing everything from calling up other parents when someone says something not nice about their kid to paying colleges to accept them, right? So this huge span of ways I can sort of mow down the path of any challenge that is in my kid's way and make it easy for them. And they will continue to advance through life. They will continue lifting those 1 pound weights, but they're not really growing. And then, of course, we know that there are families in which there's trauma and parents think, I have to make it really hard on my kid so that they will succeed. And sometimes that crosses a line. And I'm not asking any parent to make the world a harder place for their kid. The world's going to do that for you. It's automatically going to put challenges in the way of your child. But what I want to do is encourage us to get comfortable with this middle box that we're seeing here, with the idea that our kids will experience pain and that it's not necessarily our job to fix that. It's our job to be with our child as they learn how to tolerate that discomfort so that they can develop coping skills and resilience around that. I'm going to talk about this in terms of a study that many of you may know about. It's an older study, and it's called, the study is about a concept called learned helplessness. So I hate this on here because I love dogs, and this is a little bit difficult to hear, but this is a scientist who was interested in the idea of why we become helpless and what we do when we feel sort of overburdened by pain or by discomfort or challenges. And so Seligman is the name of this scientist, and he worked with dogs, and he had 3 boxes with 3 different dogs in them, and they were harnessed into these boxes, and he had a low-level electrical current running in the bottom of some of the boxes. So dogs are harnessed in, and in the first box, the dog feels no electricity, and they can just hang out there. And in the second box, the dog feels electricity, but there's a button right by his nose, and if he presses it, the electricity will stop. And then in the final box, the dogs feel the electricity and they have no way of stopping it. So he first conditioned them in each of their environments, and then he moved them into a different box, each dog, A, B, and C groups. And this time there was electricity running through the electrical current running through the floor of each box. So every dog was exposed to a feeling of pain and discomfort. the first group of dogs, as a reminder, they were from group A, and so they did not feel any pain prior to being put into this box. And they laid down and they just accepted that this is what this box feels like now. I will be in pain. And the second group of dogs, they were the ones who had discovered that there was a button. They had a button that they could push. And so they knew that there was a way to bring the pain to an end. And the third group of dogs, they felt the current, and that was it. So on this, what I've neglected to mention, but you can see in this photo here, is that the second group of dogs, A, B, and C, they could all escape. They were feeling the electrical current. They were all exposed to it in the same way, but they were not harnessed. And they had a teeny tiny wall. And if they jumped over that wall, A, B, or C dogs, they could end the pain. Of the three, I told you that the group A, they just laid down. Group C, that was the one who felt the shock before, but they couldn't stop it. That's trauma. They just laid down too. But the middle group of dogs, group B, those were the ones who had an experience before where they felt some pain, they touched the button with their nose, and they got out. This group of dogs, when they were unharnessed and they felt the electricity, they jumped right over the wall. Every dog had that opportunity. The point of this study is that our brains sort of default to helplessness or giving up when we feel pain or discomfort. And unless a person has an experience in which they are able to overcome that, they don't know that they can. They don't believe that they can. And so they will accept helplessness as the sort of natural state. And in fact, this scientist did a follow-up study recently in 2016 that really proved that helplessness is the default state of mind for feeling this way. So that's really tough to imagine these dogs in that situation, but we learned a lot from it. What we learned is that the thing that overcomes helplessness is experience. And so it's not pep talks from us. It's not us saying, I really think you're wonderful, and I think that you should have a ton of friends, and I don't understand what's wrong with everybody else if they don't like you. It's not us logicking the way out of it. It's a child having an actual experience in which they are validated that they can get themselves out of it. They can make a friend if they feel isolated. They can do well on a math test if they study hard enough, that sort of thing. So I want you to keep that in mind, because I want you to remember that adversity is the thing that makes our kids stronger. I want to give you another quick analogy here. There is a term that greenhouse keepers use, and I love this. So when they have these tiny little seedlings and they're growing them in the very comfy conditions of their greenhouse, they occasionally will take those little plants and put them outside in freezing temperatures for just little bits of time. And then they bring them back into the comfort of the greenhouse. And the term for this that they use is called hardening off. So they harden off the plants so that when it's time for the plants to leave the very cozy, perfectly climate-controlled atmosphere of the greenhouse, they have strength. They have experience with being in the cold, and they know that they can overcome that. I mean, I'm really personifying these plants, but truly, they need little bits of exposure so that they don't die and wither at the first time that they are put out into the cold. We're the same way. We need lots of experience with feeling really uncomfortable for little amounts of time. That's actually how we grow. So hopefully I've completely dissuaded you from the idea that making things really easy for kids is ideal, and also that making things too hard for kids is helpful too. It's really a matter of kind of finding that sweet spot, that center lane. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that. So I want to do it, though, in terms of this idea of coming of age. I have always been fascinated by this concept. I first learned about it, really learned about it in college, but I was fascinated by it much earlier, really as a high schooler, as many high schoolers are and may not realize it. It's a massive genre in our culture in terms of entertainment. So it's this idea of how do we, as young people who are just yearning for independence and freedom and maybe a little bit of rebellion. How do we cross the threshold from being little kids into being adults? And in terms of pop culture, we see it in all the best stories that we've ever watched in a movie or read in a book. So whether that's, walking down the railroad track until you find a dead body, and Stand By Me, that was like when I was in a young person, that was kind of the iconic coming of age movie at the time. Or whether, you're going to join the rebel forces and fight the stormtroopers. Whatever it is an opportunity to prove that you are a grown-up, and kids long for that. I'm going to talk about that more specifically in terms of 4 steps that are involved here. But what I want to say is that this idea of coming of age, it's timeless and it's universal. So it's been around forever. And we tend to culturally, historically, celebrate that in a variety of ways through a rite of passage. Rites of passage are extremely important no matter where you live, no matter what time you've lived in. So whether it was 1700s or 2000s, rites of passage are very meaningful to us. I feel like we've lost our way a little bit. I feel like what first was understood to be a rite of passage, and I'm going to go to a slide here to explain this better. This is Arnold van Gennep. I always have to look up his name because I want to call him Arthur every single time. I don't know why that's stuck in my head. Arnold van Gennep. And so in the 1900s, he created this. His was a 3-step. I've made it into a 4-step process because I think it's easier to understand. But the idea of what it means to become an adult, and what it means to go through a rite of passage that helps you become an adult. And his concept looked like this. First, you have to separate from your group. Second, you have to be tested in one way or another. Third, you acquire some learning or personal growth as a result of that test. And then fourth, you can return to the community a better version of yourself, knowing more, and being able to really contribute to your community because of what you've learned and acquired through that separation and through that test that you've gone through. Again, every story we love follows this pattern, and Joseph Campbell sort of worked with that in his work with the hero's journey and the hero of 1,000 faces. And so we see this as an archetype. It is a universal truth, no matter where you live or who you are or what you've been through, that these are what you do to go through your rite of passage on your way to becoming an adult. Now, so often, I feel like a rite of passage looks like handing your kids the car keys or having a big sweet 16 party, or any other kind of sort of cultural, religious, communal event that says, hey, kid, you're kind of an adult now. You're 15 or 16 or 17 or whatever it may be. And so it seems like, you're supposed to be an adult. So here you go. And it's not as meaningful as I think it once was and as I think it should be. I do think we as parents can enable this still. And as teachers, we can do that as well. And that's where I think we find that sweet spot, that middle of the road. And when I was showing you the 3 boxes, where on the one side, it's too easy. And on the other side, it's getting traumatic. And in the middle, it's kind of painful. And that's really where these 4 steps happen. I'm going to tell you a little personal story, and then I'm going to relate it to that 4-step process. Okay. Don't let the turkeys get you down. This is a story I share in my book. So I used to love Sandra Boynton. I am 50. So for anyone in the audience who's about my age, when I was in 6th grade, I first learned about Sandra Boynton, and I thought she was really hilarious. And she was sort of a big part of my life. And this in particular, I thought was very funny. So I probably had like a t-shirt or a tote bag of it. The point is, the turkeys really did get me down. When I was in 11th grade, I had an opportunity to participate in a program that was a farm school. It was a boarding program that my school participated in. So I applied and I was accepted, and there were kids from all over the country who were accepted. And this was a program in Vershire, Vermont. And so we got to go there for a semester, and it was academically rigorous and it was physically very rigorous. For the first half of the day, we studied French and Thoreau and math and all the normal sort of curriculum tied into the mountains a little bit more than usual, probably. And in the afternoons, we farmed. It was a working farm, and it was very hippie woo-woo back before that was such a big craze, and I loved it. And so we were given chores. And again, I'm 16, 17 years old. It's my junior year of high school. And the work was hard. It was physical and it was demanding. And I was away from home. And one of the chores that I was given was turkey duty. So I had to wake up for 2 weeks. We rotated chores. So my job for 2 weeks was to wake up before sunrise, get on my big down coat, go out to Turkey Hill, climb Turkey Hill, fill a big bucket full of grain and scatter it on the frozen grass so that the turkeys could have their breakfast. And I did it, and I hated it. And I did it for a while. I don't know, I maybe did it for a week. It was a 2-week rotation. The second week I was on this chore duty, I slept in one morning. I was exhausted. I slept in and no one noticed. And so later that day, I went to my classes. I did the rest of my farm stuff in the afternoon. We had a delicious warm dinner. I went to bed, exhausted to the bone. And the next morning I said, I bet I could sleep in again. Like, no one's really noticing. And so I did. I slept in the second day. And on the third morning, as I was trying to sleep in a little bit, the door to the dorm that I was in flew open, and the farm manager came in and started screaming my name at the top of his lungs. And I came out disheveled and confused and terrified. And he said, "What were you thinking? What were you thinking? Do you know what happens when you don't feed turkeys?" And of course I didn't know what happened. And he said, "They become cannibalistic." And I just melted. I melted. I want you to know that they did not, in fact, start a Donner Party, but they were getting very close, and which is great that he caught it. That is the most mortifying and upsetting moment of my teenage life. Not everybody had an early morning chore. We were on rotation. So it seemed like the entire dorm came out to watch me get berated. And I felt like a total failure. I really failed. I did. I failed those turkeys. I failed the farm. He gave me a big dressing down about being part of a community and why was it fair for everyone else to do their chores. And I vividly remember being stuck with the question, who do you think you are? And I couldn't answer it. I was like, I'm a kid and I'm maybe lazy and I don't know. So for me, this was my rite of passage. And it wasn't a big, exciting party, and it wasn't fun at all, but this is what it looks like in terms of that classic formula. So separation from my group, I went to the mountain school, and that was really cool at first, scary to be alone, but I was proud to be setting out on that journey and on that adventure. And then a time of being tested, chore duty. I did not pass that test. I failed miserably. And then a time of learning and growth as a result. So for me, what made this experience so fundamental to who I am is that I got to go back to my own school and no one knew anything about turkeys. I did not have to live in the shadow of that disaster for very long. Also, because it was a farm community, it was really busy. And so people just kind of like got on with it. They had work to do. They had a lot of things to keep them busy and distracted. And the farm manager never mentioned it again. Once I got on track, that was the end of it. So I learned a lot and I grew as a result of this. And then the return and reintegration as a better version of myself. So I'm back at my school now. I'm not full of shame, although I had been for a while after the incident. And what I learned is that the feeling of self-indulgence was not worth any pain it would cause someone else. So I've kept that lesson with me my entire life. And I think about that. I love self-indulgence. I really do. But I know that I have to be cautious about when it's going to be at somebody else's expense. So that is an example of how we can find this sort of center lane with our kids. And that was so painful. And yet now I look back on it and I'm really happy that it happened. I'm really happy I learned what I did from it. Okay, so the book is an investigation of this concept. It's really a love letter to this idea of coming of age, of being, a teenager, a tween, a young person who's just trying to figure life out and is going to make a ton of mistakes along the way, who's going to be selfish, who's going to be lazy, who's going to, say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or make a bad choice. And so in order to do this investigation for the book, I interviewed families across the country about their family's experience. And this is where it ties back a little bit to the impression management and the cupcake picture in the beginning. So many families told me the moment they started feeling better about whatever they were going through, and I'm going to explain these archetypes in a second, but they are families of kids who failed to take care of their body, who drank and ended up in the hospital, who were rebellious and got suspended from school, or who just were struggling to get along with members of their own family, or couldn't find their own peer group at school. All of these just devastating stories. And all these parents told me that the moment they started to feel better was when they opened up about what they were going through to someone else. So I'm not suggesting that you have to get a megaphone out. I really wouldn't want you to go out there and start talking about your child's missteps or failures or, not feeding the turkeys, whatever it is. You don't need to go shouting it from the rooftops. But I call it having a whisper network. And so looking for someone who can relate to your story and looking for someone who can say to you, you're not alone. We went through that. My kid also did that. I heard, my friend's neighbor, they had a child who went through a similar thing. Let me put you in touch. Every single family said that was a moment for them, a watershed moment where they started to feel better. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you. I also want to tell you that all of these kids, these archetypes that you see here are represented in the book. And as I said, really, from subtle to dramatic were the stories that I heard. So the more subtle ones are like the bench warmer. That's the kid who's really struggling to believe in himself, who doesn't think he should probably play, but he's happy to sit there and watch, that sort of thing. All the way up to, the kids who are taking really dangerous risks. So in the book, you will find these 8 archetypes, and then you will meet the families who talk to me about them. And there is something really beautiful about us recognizing the universality of these mistakes and of these archetypes, and that just like rites of passage, these experiences are really normal, even though they can cause us as parents to say, first of all, I'm really freaked out about my kid, so I'm worried about that. And secondarily, I'm worried about what this says about me. Do people think I'm a bad parent because this happened to us? Do people think something is wrong with our family because we're going through this? And one of the relief messages of the book that I've heard from readers already is that it's so good to know that I'm not alone. And part of what we can do with our impression management for kids is let each other know that they're not alone, and let our kids know that this is really normal, what they're going through. I do offer a 3-step process. So for each of these families that you meet and each of these archetypes that you meet, you'll hear a story, and then you'll see a 3-step process that I recommend you can use to help your kid get through this so that they don't get stuck there. This slide is out of order. I have an amazing person who does my slides with me, and we always laugh because she and I never see a typo. We never, ever do. And right before this, I sent her an email and I said, oops, it's contain, resolve, evolve. And we know that like the back of our hands. But of course, when you look at the same thing a bazillion times. So Contain is first, resolve is second, and evolve is last. So I'm going to fix that after this. But anyway, these are the 3 steps, and I want to just briefly guide you through them before we do our Q&A. Contain. Let's say you discover your child is in the midst of a crisis. They are coming across some kind of a failure experience, a setback, whatever it is. Contain is the first thing that you're going to do. And what that means is one of 2 things. Either you need to contain the problem. So maybe there's something coming at your child that is causing this issue. So maybe they're overexposed on technology. That could be one thing. And then you want to probably contain that. So we're going to limit that right now. Sometimes it's the actual child themselves who needs to be contained. You may have a child who's making some decisions that are dangerous to them. And so it might mean, you know what, kiddo, we're spending the weekend together in the house, not going to go out and see friends because there's some stuff going on that I feel like could tiptoe into dangerous territory here. A question I do want you to ask yourself when you're in the contain phase of problem solving is this bothering me, my child's situation right now? Is it bothering me because it's annoying, or because it's disruptive, or because it's contrary to what I sort of fantasize things would be like? Or is it bothering me because it's dangerous to my child? So you need to do that sort of litmus test first. If it's dangerous to your child, you're going to contain the child. If it's the other answers, maybe you can reevaluate and say it's not quite the crisis I thought it was, or maybe you need to do some containment around messaging and around understanding, things like that. It's all listed out in the book. Resolve is the second step. So containing it is like putting a Band-Aid on the problem. Resolve is really when you need to take action and move forward in a variety of ways that are going to help your child solve this. And this is not an opportunity for you to solve it or for you to come in and fix it, but for your child to take some steps towards doing better, towards making a change, towards fixing an issue, whatever it is. There's a menu of options for you in the book, but so you can refer to that menu and say, based on what we're going through right now, it looks like I need to pick these 2. I need to pick apology, teach my kid how to give a good apology for what they did, or I need to pick education. They just have sort of a warped understanding of how to use this tool or how to relate to these other people, and maybe I need to kind of just give them some guidance there. So like I said, lots and lots of choices there for you. It's almost like a choose your own adventure format. And then evolve is the third step. And this is the one I think is most important. And it's also in some ways going to sound the easiest. And I know for many of us, it's the hardest. Evolve is when we put it behind us. So we say, okay, we contained this issue. Then we worked on a couple things to resolve it and make it better. And now it's time to say, all right, this does not define who you are. I'm not going to keep pressing that bruise. I'm not going to remind you of this mistake every time you go out. Say, now you're not going to drink tonight, right? Because you remember what happened last time and I'm still kind of nervous. You might do that a time or 2, but you cannot do that every single time because your child is going to just start to give up. You've got the evolve phase is really about not pressing that bruise. So I know one that parents tell me they most commonly press the bruise on, and that's friendship issues. You sure everything's okay? Did you have someone to sit with today? And we're sort of conveying this message that we don't have confidence in their ability to put this behind them, that we're still struggling with it and we can't put it behind us. And it does nothing to help our child move past it. So these are the 3 sort of primary steps that I encourage you to take when you find out, and they're universal. So it doesn't matter what it is that you're bumping up against with your kid, but when they are feeling like they are in sort of stuck or in trouble or facing a challenge that is quite painful or uncomfortable, then your job is to be sort of the manager of these 3 steps with them while they get to take action on them. This is also one of my favorite things that came out of the book. Every family that I spoke with there were two universal messages that were the same, no matter what. The first one I told you earlier, they felt better the moment they talked to somebody about what was going on. The second is after speaking with each family, and time had passed for most of these families, that they were able to say, yeah, we'd had an experience, a year ago, and here's what it was. And they filled me in and we did our interview. I said at the end of each interview, if I could give you a magic wand and you could go back and erase this experience from your child's life, would you use it? And I really did not expect the results to be what they were. I thought like half of the parents would want to get rid of the really awful experience they'd been through. But all but one of the families I spoke with said, I would not use the magic wand, because what my child learned from this eventually is so valuable to them now that I couldn't take that away from them. So even though in the moment when you are experiencing a challenge or a crisis or a failure or a setback with your child, you're going to want to use the wand. I want to use the wand a lot. I think it's helpful to know that so many families will say down the road, it's so good that happened. I would have erased the turkey situation immediately if I could. And now I'm really glad that I learned what I learned from it. So unless it's a situation that you can't come back from, of course, you're going to use the wand, then I think it's helpful to have this visual in mind. Now, I don't think it's helpful to say to your child, you're probably going to be glad that's happened someday. That is not a great idea. Your child will be really mad. And we don't want to hear that either ourselves when we're going through a tough time. But I do think if you can tuck that into your brain somewhere so that you know it when your child is suffering. I have a child who's suffering a lot right now. And I just found out about it yesterday. And it's, my kids are 21 and 23. So we've been at this for a long time. But, it's a little romantic situation that is not going well. And I would love to magic wand it away right this very second. But I am keeping that in mind. Okay, this is a rite of passage of sorts. This is a separation in which my kiddo is going to learn a lot about themselves and grow. So I want to encourage you to keep that wand kind of in the back of your mind. I'm going to leave you with a couple sort of ways that we can keep in touch. And then I know we have some really good questions and lots of time to answer those. If you are the kind of person, I want to tell you about kind of a cool thing that we created to go with this book. If you are a person who likes bullet journaling, I know it's a huge trend right now. We have one for you and it's free. You can use your phone and grab it from the QR code here and download it. And it is just the size of a bullet journal. So you can cut it out and put it in. And it's a really great way to work through the book and take notes on it and sort of interact with it. So that's one thing I want you to know about. This is another thing, and as you saw earlier, I don't use word-heavy slides, but I wanted to put this up here because I thought you also, if you had your phone, might want to just take a photo of this. These are things that you can do for a parent whose child is going through a tough time, who's facing a setback. So I'm not going to read them all to you. I'll just tell you one or two of my favorites. If you want to snap a photo of it, these are in the book. They're in the back of the book, but in case you don't get it, then I hope that you will sort of keep these in mind. But the ones that I really love the most are sort of normalizing this for a friend and reminding them your friend whose child is struggling is probably full of some doubts about what this means about their child and what this means about their future. So saying things like, I'm not going to judge your child because of this, and I need you to know that about me. This is just a normal part of being a parent of a tween or a teen, and you're going to get through this. I think that is one of the best things that you can do. I know in my community, as I said, my kids are now, they're out of the house. But when my kids were in high school in particular, there was a crisis. We have a huge high school. There was a crisis. It seemed like every month, some family had something that they were going through. And I think because we had so many, we got pretty good at deciding that we were going to do these things for each other. And that was a huge help to the parents. And it reflected back onto the kids and made it easier for them. Okay. I, like everybody who writes a book, am on social media. So you can follow me on Instagram at Michelle Icard if you like. And I also have a parenting group on Facebook. It's called Less Stressed Middle School Parents. So you can join me there, or just my public Facebook page is just my name, Michelle Icard, author and speaker. And with that, I think Charlene is going to come back with some questions that you guys have, and I'll stop sharing.
Oh, wait, Michelle, before you do,
Yeah.
do you mind putting the QR code back for a minute? Some people are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. There it is. It's not full screen, but there it is.
There you go, Lisa. All right. Well, Michelle, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Were so clear and so rich with everything you've given us to think about today. We do have some great questions, and I'm going to answer one of them right off the bat. Will a recording be available? Yes. This will be available on our video library, which is free. And we partner with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula to do the video production. And we promise I will send you the link to all registrants as soon as that posts. Okay. So, Michelle, I want to start by saying, what was it that made you decide to write this book at this time?
So a couple things. And I sort of alluded to them both. One is my general fascination with coming of age. And I just wanted to do a deep dive in, and you'll get some of this in the book, into what other people do culturally to celebrate coming of age, and what I think we might be getting wrong about that, and where I think, you know, we could do better. So part of it was just a deep interest in that, sort of academically and conceptually, paired with what I alluded to about my own experience with my kids. I feel like our community just had a lot of this, and I believe, I sort of have to believe that every community does. But, you know, a few years out of my kids graduating high school, I was reflecting on that and thinking about how our community supported each other when various families were going through crisis. And there were lots of crises that were really little, that weren't community news, but where I saw, because I'm in the position that I'm in, because I write these books, where I was highly aware of the Whisper Network, because people were reaching out to me and saying, my friend's daughter has an eating disorder, and can you please point me in the right direction? Or my friend's son is having such disruptive anger. How do they figure out where to go? And I felt like I was ushering people on this path, and it felt good to me. And I know that it was helpful to them. And so kind of exploring that was really important to me, to broaden that beyond my community.
I think that is really important. You know, when I used to do these in person and stand in front of people, I would always say, this problem, whether it's opioid addiction or substance use, or a kid who's having mental health challenges, it may not be affecting your child, but it's definitely affecting their friends. So let's all get educated about it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's a really good one. There is no shortage of problems with kids that you can learn from. So, Michelle, one of the things you say, and I love this, is that parents of tweens and teens need to give their kids practice protecting and taking care of themselves. What happens if kids don't get that practice?
Like any kind of practice, I think what happens if you don't practice is you don't get good. Unless, of course, some kids are kind of naturals, you know? So there are certain things that you may have a fifth grader who's doing your taxes. Great. You know, some kids just are highly organized and highly motivated and responsible, and that's excellent. But most of us don't have a lot of practice with coping skills unless we have a reason to practice it, right? So unless we have a setback, we don't have the opportunity to feel the feelings. And that's a big piece of it. So just as sort of a funny aside, I watched this show called Junior Bake Off. I don't know if there are any other fans out there, but I'm obsessed with it. It's part of the Great British Bake Off thing. Do you know it?
I think we had a kid from Menlo Park who made it to the finals.
Oh, I'm such a fan. So the kids in it are 11 to 14, and they are just baking their little hearts out. They're so cute, and I love it so much. And the kid who gets kicked off the show at the end of every episode bawls. They can't help it. They are crying so hard. And it occurred to me when I was watching it, like, they've never felt this before. They have never worked so passionately and so hard for something. And I could see as a parent being like, I would never subject my kid to being on a public display where I know they're going to cry and they're going to get kicked off because they messed up their bake. But there's something really beautiful about letting kids feel the feelings and not being weird about it and just being like, yeah, that really sucks. That's so sad. It's deeply sad. So to your point about practice, I want them to practice feelings, not just skills, but they need to know what it feels like to be really in despair sometimes. And they need to know what it feels like to be very, very happy sometimes. That's just practice coping is what it is.
That's really well said. I started my career working with young kids at Stanford's laboratory preschool. And one of the most important things we did was teach them to name their emotions. And my daughter today is 32 and she'll say to me, see, Mom, it's your fault. I tell everybody how I'm feeling.
No, that's so good. Vocabulary is so important.
Right? So that's,
yeah,
exactly. All right. So here's another question. I like this one a lot. How can schools give our teens and tweens more opportunity for failure, learning, and growth? So much of school is structured around performance and competence.
I mean, that is such a massive systemic question that there's where I live, we're like one of the worst states I'm in North Carolina. So our education gets a really bad rap. Public school education does. But there's so much pressure to teach to the test and to look at scores. And my kids, there were many times where they felt sort of like, we're not learning. We're just reduced to this sort of number. And so I think what parents and teachers can do to encourage this is to create an environment in the classroom where it's okay to explore and where it's encouraged to be curious and where you can model for your students what it's like to be wrong, to make guesses and to absolutely get them wrong. And when someone gets something wrong, to be really enthusiastic about it, not in a way that you can see right through, but in a way that says, I'm going to bring it back to Bake Off again. When their bakes are horrible, they say something like, the dough is raw and it's a bit messy, but the effort was amazing. You were brave to take on such a hard bake. So that's the kind of technique that I would look for in a classroom. Like, yeah, maybe the result isn't what we wanted, but what a neat attempt. What a brave attempt.
I like that. So here is a dad asking, is your book relevant for an 11, almost 12-year-old? I know what you're going to say.
Yes. So some of the examples I gave today were older kid examples, a lot of teen examples. The book is really for parents of kids ages 8 to 18. We've got elementary school examples, middle school examples, and high school examples in there.
But you are a person who loves middle schoolers, right?
I love them. They're nuts. I love them. Yeah.
I really think that's great. Okay. So Michelle, how do you recommend encouraging teens to open up and share their challenges so they can get practice using their support systems? Very good question.
It's such a good question. Really, my previous book was all about this because it's about bridging the gap and in communication between you and your child when they're starting to pull away and they don't want to tell you this stuff. So I'll give you just a couple kind of basic tips that I think are really helpful for getting your teen to open up with you. My favorite, this is my gold standard, is something I called have a Botox brow. So it's based on a study that came out of Harvard where they put adults through an MRI and they watched their faces and they said, we're going to show you photos of people's faces. And just by looking at them, can you tell us what they're feeling? They were hooked up to the MRI so they could see that for the adults, they were using their prefrontal cortex to read people's facial expressions and decide what that person was feeling. And then they got it right, like almost all the time. Basic stuff. They could tell when someone felt joy and they could tell when someone felt scared and they could tell when someone was angry. And then they put teens through and did the same photos and the teens couldn't do it because their prefrontal cortexes are reconfiguring. So they're using the amygdala to read facial expressions, and the amygdala is not very good at it. So when your child sees that you are furrowing your brow and you're talking to them, they're assuming anger. And you might furrow your brow because you're concentrating, you're multitasking, you don't want to forget that you got something on the stove or an email you need to send. You might just have a furrowed brow. Whatever it is, your child, you say like, hey, how'd the math test go? And they're like, we don't even have our grades yet. Why are you mad at me? And you're thinking, I'm not at all mad. I just asked the question. So it's such a silly little tip. I want you to pretend that you are a celebrity on a late night talk show who's been so over Botoxed, you can't move this part of your face. Just pretend. And you're going to feel like you're a Stepford parent. You're going to feel like you look like you don't care. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been giving the same advice for 20 years. It is the best thing parents tell me for getting their kids to open up is they have a neutral face when they talk to them, because it keeps your kid from misinterpreting you as being angry.
See, isn't that interesting? I read that research. Teens are very bad about recognizing facial expressions, but they almost always think you're mad.
Yes.
Which would explain why little kids always say, my teacher doesn't like me, right?
Yeah. And also why I think kids love texting and why they like talking to us in the car or when they can't see our faces.
Yes, that is a very good point. All right, here, great questions, everybody. Here's another really good one. What's your advice to parents with kids who naturally feel so much more deeply and negatively than most other kids, who really feel pain and self-judgment so much more?
Yeah, I mean, my advice to the parent is strap in. Your child is highly emotional, and that's not wrong or abnormal. They have really big emotions, and sounds like often those can feel negative. I don't want you to absorb that. You can give them tools for coping with them. So one of my favorite techniques for this is something that I call try this first, where you have them make a list when they are feeling crummy, rotten, sad, angry, whatever the negative emotion is. Actually, prior to them feeling that, I want you to sit with them and say, let's write a list of 10 things that make you feel good, that just sort of make you smile or giggle or feel comfortable or whatever it is. And maybe that's watching cat videos on YouTube or taking a bubble bath or baking or whatever it is. Doesn't matter what it is, but it needs to be something they can do on their own. And it should take about 20 minutes, whatever that thing is. So you write those down, and then you can hang them in the back of their closet or on their wall or whatever. And when they come to you and they're just about something, you can say, I am so sorry that you're feeling this way. I bet that sounds really tough. Why don't you try something on your try this first list for 20 minutes? We'll set a timer and then come see me, and then we'll have a snack and we'll talk and we'll see about what we can do next. For a lot of kids, they just need to kind of break that cycle and get themselves distracted. And they're also learning coping skills, and they're learning that they can take care of themselves and that they can self-regulate. And that's really important. So unless it's crossing over into territory that's dangerous, I think that building incrementally those coping skills like that is a good way for you to diffuse from it, and also a good way for them to learn that they can take care of themselves.
That is wonderful advice. Parents, I haven't tried that one, but I would have. I think that is great. Okay, here's another couple good questions around self-esteem. We live in an area here in Silicon Valley where there's so much pressure to succeed, right? Many perfectionists, many kids who are overachievers, but they still don't believe in themselves. What can you advise for an overly perfectionist child who's prone to anxiety and stress?
I mean, I think there are a few pronged approach here. We have a few prongs. Therapy is great. CBT in particular, perhaps even DBT, depending on the level of anxiety. If you're someone who would consider medication for anxiety, that can be really helpful. I know it was for one of my kids. So, and it helped them learn coping skills once, and then they didn't need the medicine for very long. But okay, that's like a bigger deal, if it's a bigger deal. I think that, DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy for the person who just asked. I'm using acronyms. I think a big thing that we can do is just sort of start to teach our kids at an early age by modeling it and by really meaning it. It's not such a big deal. Like whatever it is not such a big deal. I talk about in the book, I talk about this in terms of a parental audience. I don't want you to say this to your kids, but I talk about death a lot. I'm like, you know what? Someday we're all going to be dead. It's very perspective giving for me personally. That works for me. I don't want you to do that with your kids, but there is a way in which you can speak to your child that says like, it's okay. It's okay if you don't get a B. It's okay if you get a C. It's okay if you get a D. Like if it is that extreme of a situation, I want you to sort of like take all of the stakes off the table for a while, because there are a million ways to be happy in life. And I want kids to know that, and the less pressure they feel, the happier they're going to be. Obviously, that's like such a basic sort of sentiment, but I'm between those two. Like, I don't know if it's therapy for this kid, and I don't know if it's just a change of sort of conversation at home.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, we really want to thank you for all the amazing advice today. And everybody, I really encourage you to pick up this wonderful book, 8 Setbacks That Can Make a Child a Success. I've been in this education arena for decades and decades, and this is a really great book. So again, thank you so much, Michelle Icard, for a wonderful talk. All of you, this was recorded. We will send you the recording when it's available, but hop on it because it won't be up forever. So congratulations, Michelle, on the publication of your new book, and we wish you well with everything. Hope everybody gets a chance to read it. Take care. Good night, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.